When the fire swallowed our home, I saw my husband choose her, his first love, over me. That night, I thought my life had ended too. Months later, after the divorce, I built something from the ashes he left behind, and what happened next shocked everyone. I can still smell the smoke. Even now, years later, it creeps into my dreams, curling around the edges until I wake up gasping. That night started so ordinary that I almost laugh at it now. Lily was upstairs in her pink pajamas, the soft hum of her lullaby machine drifting through the baby monitor. I had a pot of soup simmering on the stove and a basket of laundry waiting to be folded. Daniel, my husband, was in the living room, phone glued to his ear. He'd been like that for months, always, on a call, always stepping outside when it rang. If you've ever felt that kind of creeping distance, you'll understand, it's like living next to a stranger who still wears your husband's face. I remember glancing at him as I stirred the soup. His brow was furrowed, his free hand gesturing sharply, like he was angry or desperate. When he saw me looking, he turned his back. I didn't know it yet, but everything was already burning before the flames ever appeared. The first whiff of smoke came from the hallway. At first, I thought maybe something on the stove had spilled over, but when I turned off the burner and checked, the kitchen was fine. Then I saw the flicker, orange light licking at the base of the living room curtains. In an instant, it was everywhere, the sound like 100 flags snapping in the wind, the heat blooming against my face. My heart shot up into my throat. Daniel, I screamed. He was already on his feet, but instead of grabbing a fire extinguisher or running to Lily's room, he was sprinting toward the front door. I thought he was going to get help. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. I ran toward the stairs to get Lily, coughing. The air was thick, hot. My eyes stung. Behind me, I heard a crash of glass, someone breaking a window. I spun just in time to see a figure stumbling out of the guest room off the hallway. A woman, hair long and dark, face streaked with soot, clutching a small white dog to her chest. For a moment, the world slowed. Recognition hit me like a punch. It was Clara, the name I'd seen on his phone, the old friend he said he was just helping. I hadn't known she was living here, in the guest house he'd built, for his parents. She looked terrified, barefoot, wearing one of Daniel's t-shirts. And then Daniel appeared behind her, eyes wild. He didn't even look at me. He grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her toward the front door, shielding her with his body as if she were made of glass. I heard myself yell his name, but my voice was hoarse with smoke. He didn't answer. He didn't even glance back. I can't describe what that moment felt like except to say it was colder than the fire was hot. A kind of freezing clarity. The man who had promised to protect me, who had sworn, in sickness and in health, was making a choice right in front of me. And it wasn't me. Somehow my body moved before my brain. I turned and bolted up the stairs, each breath like swallowing sandpaper. Lily was still asleep, thank God, her small chest rising and falling. I scooped her up, wrapping her in a blanket. She whimpered but didn't wake. I pressed my lips to her hair, smoke and baby shampoo, and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy's got you." By the time I reached the landing again, the staircase felt like a tunnel of fire. My lungs burned. Every step was a battle. I didn't see Daniel anywhere. I only saw the open front door in the cool night beyond. I staggered toward the back door instead, shorter distance, less fire. I kicked it open with my foot, stumbled onto the lawn, and fell to my knees, clutching Lily. Cool air, sirens in the distance, neighbors shouting. For a few seconds, everything was just noise and stars and Lily's soft crying. Then I looked up. Daniel was on the grass a few yards away, holding Clara. His arm around her shoulders, his hand stroking her hair. Her little dog trembling in her lap. They were both wrapped in a blanket someone had given them. He didn't come to me. He didn't ask if Lily was okay. He just stared at us with something, guilt, shock, flickering across his face. The fire trucks arrived, lights flashing red and white against the smoke. Firefighters rushed past, hoses snaking across the lawn. A paramedic knelt beside me, checking Lily's breathing, shining a light in my eyes. Another walked over to Daniel and Clara. They were treated first. I remember sitting on the curb, shivering even though the night was warm. The house, our house, was collapsing in on itself, sparks shooting into the sky. I thought about all the baby photos on the fridge, the wedding album on the coffee table, the letters Daniel used to write me when we were dating. All of it turning to ash. I thought about the life we'd built and how fragile it had been all along. Hours later, after the flames were out and the trucks had left, we went to the hospital for smoke inhalation. Lily and I were cleared quickly. Clara had minor burns on her arm. Daniel never left her side. He didn't ride in the ambulance with me. He didn't even call to check where we were. 2 days after that, the hospital released Clara. Daniel drove her home, to wherever home was now, while Lily and I took a taxi to my sister's apartment. He texted me once, "Glad you're both okay. We'll talk soon." That was it. No apology, no explanation. The talk came a week later, in a lawyer's office. His lawyer, not mine. He slid divorce papers across the table. His hands were steady, mine shook. He didn't fight for custody. Maybe out of guilt, maybe because Clara was already pregnant. Yes, the rumors were true. He didn't even try to deny them. I signed because I couldn't bear to drag Lily through a fight. The lawyer's pen felt heavier than it should have. With each signature, a piece of my old life disappeared. By the time we walked out, I was no longer his wife. I was just the woman he'd left behind in a burning house. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The walls smelled like bread at dawn, which was at least better than smoke. Lily slept in a little bed under the window. I worked 2 jobs, receptionist by day, online tutoring at night. We survived on instant noodles and secondhand furniture. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that something better would come. But nights were the hardest. When Lily was asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the fire over and over. Daniel's hand on Clara's arm, his back to me, my voice lost in the smoke. And yet, there was something else stirring beneath the grief. A stubborn ember of anger, maybe, or pride. I started writing, not as a diary but as a way to make sense of it. Blog posts about rebuilding after betrayal, about single motherhood, about small victories like getting Lily to laugh again. People started reading, commenting, sending me their own stories. Women who'd been left. Mothers who'd had to run from burning houses of their own, literal or not. Each message was like a stitch in a torn seam. One evening, after a long day, I watched Lily coloring on the kitchen floor. She looked up and smiled, crayon smudge on her cheek, and my heart squeezed. Daniel had taken our house, our marriage, my sense of safety. But he hadn't taken this little person who trusted me completely. And he hadn't taken my voice. That was the night I realized something. The fire had destroyed everything I thought I needed, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, breathing, holding Lily, writing. If I could survive flames, I could survive him. The blog grew. Readers sent donations, small at first, then enough to cover groceries. A local women's shelter asked if they could share my posts. Then a podcast invited me on. Each time, I said yes, even though my hands shook. Each time, my voice got steadier. Looking back, I see that the night of the fire was both an ending and a beginning. It was the night Daniel saved Clara instead of me, but it was also the night I saved myself and my daughter. It just took me a while to understand. And that's where I was, 6 months later, broke but not broken, tired but still writing, when the phone rang with an invitation that would change everything again. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday, 6 months after the fire. Lily was at preschool, and I was hunched over my laptop at the tiny kitchen table above the bakery, editing another blog post. The smell of fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards, warm and sweet, and for a moment it almost masked the ache of exhaustion in my bones. The caller introduced herself as Marisol, a coordinator for the city's annual Women Rising Conference. She'd read my blog. She said my words about survival had been circulating on social media, shared thousands of times. "Would you consider speaking?" she asked. I actually laughed. Me, speak at a conference? I'm just a single mom writing about her messy life. "You're exactly who they need," she said. "Someone real, someone who's lived it." When we hung up, I stared at the phone. Fear wrapped itself around me like a cold shawl. I'd never spoken in front of more than a classroom of restless teenagers during my tutoring sessions. But then I looked at the photo of Lily taped to my laptop, her big brown eyes and gap-toothed grin, and I remembered what I'd promised myself in the ashes of that night, never to shrink again. So I said yes. The weeks leading up to the conference were a blur of late nights. I'd put Lily to bed, then sit at the table with my notebook, scribbling and scratching out lines. I wanted to tell the truth but not sound bitter. I wanted to be honest about the fire and the betrayal, but also about the tiny, stubborn hope that had carried me through. Sometimes Lily would pad out of her room in her socks and climb into my lap. "Are you writing, Mommy?" She'd whisper, "Yes, sweetheart," I'd say, hugging her. "I'm writing our story." The night before the conference, nerves churned in my stomach so hard I could barely sleep. I kept imagining myself on stage, forgetting my words, fainting, people staring. But I kept going back to that moment in the fire when I had carried Lily through smoke on my own. If I could survive that, surely I could survive a microphone and a few hundred faces. The conference took place in a downtown hotel ballroom with high ceilings and glittering chandeliers. Women milled around in bright dresses and business suits, their name tags catching the light. The hum of conversation was like the sea. I stood near the stage clutching my note cards, palms sweating, knees trembling. When they announced my name, I walked up the steps like I was climbing a mountain. The podium felt enormous. The lights were blinding. I could barely see the audience, only shadows. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might drown out my voice. I took a breath, then another, and then I began. I told them about that night. The smell of smoke, the flames, the moment I realized my husband had chosen someone else. I told them about moving into the apartment above the bakery, about working 2 jobs, about writing late into the night. My voice shook at first, but as I spoke, it steadied. People leaned forward, some wiped their eyes. I thought the fire had taken everything, I said. But it left me with something I didn't know I had, my own strength. We can't always control who walks away, but we can control what we build after they're gone. When I finished, there was a beat of silence, then applause like a wave. Women stood up. Some reached for my hands as I stepped off the stage. "Thank you," they whispered. "That's my story too." I went home that night with a strange lightness in my chest, like I'd dropped a heavy stone I'd been carrying for years. Lily was asleep, curled up with her stuffed bunny. I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." A week later, an email landed in my inbox from a small but respected publisher. They'd been at the conference. They wanted me to write a book about my journey. A real book. My hands shook as I read it. The idea of telling my story to the world both terrified and thrilled me. I started writing in earnest. Every night after Lily went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee, my laptop, and a stack of her crayons. Sometimes she would leave me little drawings, a sun, a heart, a stick figure of us holding hands, as if to cheer me on. The book was called From the Ashes. I poured everything into it. The fire, the betrayal, the rebuilding, the small moments of grace. Writing it was like excavating my own heart. Some nights I cried over the keyboard. Some nights I felt like I was flying. When it finally went to print, I held the first copy in my hands and pressed it to my chest. It was more than a book. It was proof that I had survived. The launch was modest at first, a few signings at local bookstores, some podcast interviews, but the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from women across the country. They sent me photos of themselves holding the book, stories of leaving abusive partners, stories of rebuilding after disasters. Lily would sit next to me on the couch as I read the messages aloud. "They're proud of you, Mommy," she'd say. "I'm proud of you too." Then came the day of the big signing at the city library. Rows of chairs filled with people, a line that curled out the door. I smiled and signed copies, listening to their stories, feeling our pain and strength braided together. Halfway through the line, I looked up, and my breath caught. Daniel stood there, holding a copy of my book. He looked older, his hair thinner, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring. Clara wasn't with him. For a moment, the noise of the room faded. My heart hammered. The man who had turned his back on me in the fire was now standing in line to meet me. When he reached the table, he placed the book down, eyes downcast. "Would you sign it?" he asked, voice low. I picked up my pen. "Of course. I've been reading your blog," he said. "And now the book. I'm proud of you." I looked at him, really looked. He was no longer the center of my world, no longer the man who could shatter me. He was just a person, full of flaws and regrets. "Thank you," I said quietly, signing his name in neat, deliberate letters. "I didn't know you had this strength," he murmured. I closed the book and slid it back to him. "Neither did I said. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but the line behind him shifted and someone cleared their throat. He nodded and stepped aside. As he walked away, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't yearning. I was free. That night, driving home with Lily asleep in the back seat, the sky blazed with an orange sunset, clouds glowing like embers. I thought about how fire had once destroyed my life. But it had also lit the path to the person I was meant to become. I had lost a husband but gained a purpose. I had been left behind but had learned to lead. I glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror, her small face peaceful in sleep, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to my eyes. When we reached our apartment, I carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Did lots of people come to your book thing?" She murmured. "Lots and lots," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "And they all wanted me to tell you hi." She smiled sleepily. "We're okay now, huh?" "Yes, baby," I said. "We're more than okay." I turned off the light and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the stack of thank you notes from readers. The apartment was still small, the rent still high, but the world felt wide open. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't just surviving. I was living, and that, I realized, was the real story I wanted to tell my audience, the one I wanted you, watching right now, to take with you. Even when someone chooses someone else over you, you still have a choice. You can let it break you, or you can build something unshakable from the ashes. I built something, and if I could do it, so can you.